20-gram experience, a post on the shrooms subreddit by the user KillMyDay69. As some of you know, I trawled on 20 grams of dried mushrooms last Friday. I work as a guide at an ayahuasca retreat centre, and once in a while we all meet and trip together, and this Friday there were 30 people travelling on ayahuasca and shrooms. We had 3 shamans chanting and singing for us, 2 guys, 1 woman. I prepared my shrooms lemon text style, 4 oranges, 1 citrus and 1 peach. An hour or so before the journey, I mixed my grinded shrooms in with the lemon. We all went to the ceremony room and had a talk all together. Under that talk, I began worrying that the shrooms would lose potency due to the long time it was mixed. But believe me, that's a waste of thought. I drank the mix sitting up and stayed up about 10 minutes before I think I felt the mushrooms kicking in. So I laid down, put some shades on my eyes and covered myself with a blanket. The music accompanying us was rainforest sounds. It just went on and I was floating with it. Suddenly the sounds were ripped apart by the most feminine voice I've ever heard. She sang like a goddess, and it was by then that I was slipping in and out of my very mind. At one point, in the beginning, I got really confused because I was thinking to myself, did I do DMT? Because I was in that sort of universe but at a much slower pace. It was moving together with the female shaman's voice. It was really magical. As I have absolutely no recollection or concept about time, I don't know when the next thing happened, but all of a sudden I was dead outside the earth, and I could hear all the people in the world, hearing them suffer, having fun, screaming, laughing, and it all floated through me. But it was okay. Not good, not bad, it just was. I then suddenly realised I had hidden myself inside of me, and that recognition had me laughing so hard that I was told everyone else started to laugh along with me. It's really hard to describe in details what happened next, but at some point I really felt lost and unable to find my way back. It was like I was travelling through eons and through different periods of time. I could sense how time had changed the earth, and I knew that where I was not my time on earth. It was either in the past or the future, and the totally strange part about this was that the voices I heard were not of my native language. It was German, Russian, and so on and so forth. But I understood everything, and I could hear them all calling for God. It was in that place that I suddenly felt lost. I began to call for my wife and my sister, but naturally they didn't come. I gotta tell you, it was scary losing one's own self, particularly just after I'd found myself deep within. I kept the eye shades on, as I was too scared to take them off. Felt like I might land in another universe or time. After what felt like an eternity, I kinda realised that I'd put myself here to begin with, and that I was alone and had to let go of everything. Family, wife, kids, and so on and so forth, to liberate myself from the feeling that someone should save me. That was the turning point for the trip, and I was lifted even higher in the universe where the gods reside, and it was blissful to say the least. Next thing that happened was the strangest thing I've ever encountered on a journey. Normally, when the shaman decides the trip and journey is over, normally after 6 to 8 hours, he stands up and says with a high voice, "The journey is now ending, and the trip sitters will go and prepare fruits." But when he did that, I was like, hell no, I'm not ready to step out now. So the journey continued. Then after what was feeling like hours, he came again and again and again, at least 8 to 10 times. I was like, what the fuck, do I control time? Kept saying the same thing over and over again. At some point I just sat up and took off the shades and everyone was there. Holy Doctor Strange, it was, wow. I was still tripping, but not as hard. The next few hours, all I had was cool patterns on the night sky, and so I think in total the trip lasted 6 to 8 hours. It's now Monday evening and damn, I feel great. I feel like everything was reset and I can do exactly what I want with my life. I did Hab Base Saturday evening and it really grounded me in quite a special way. Just want to thank you all for reading. Next time, I'm doing 25. All the love to every one of you. Now, in a little follow-up to that, in the comments section from a deleted user, they state that in 2008, I did 20 grams of dried B+. I'd tripped hundreds of times and used other drugs heavily since 1995. After that trip, I've never touched a drug again. I would like to trip again at some point, but that trip just destroyed me and rebuilt me from the ground up. I can't really say it was an enjoyable or not enjoyable trip. It was just different. The come-up was like the peak I experienced on a brown microdot of acid. I was seeing people ranting in a different language, looking like Pinocchio puppets. Then from every corner, every surface, a bright light emerged. It was not psychedelic. It was a bright white light. It took over everything until all I saw was white itself. For 3 hours, I have no memory. I have no idea what I saw or felt. I started coming down and I felt burnt out. I sat shell-shocked in my backyard watching a universe hang in the cigarette smoke, planets, stars, moons in beautiful detail. And at the centre of it all, I saw this bright white light. I crawled into bed that night, a changed man. But in the following year, I did develop some extreme anxiety and had to start all over from scratch. I left my job and found one I love. I left my girlfriend and found one I love. It was something that I'm glad I did. I needed saving, but I would not recommend or do it again. Captain Fatbad replies, I've been to this all-white place on 22 grams. I compare it to the white loading room in the Matrix. I could still hear voices all around me. I thought I was stuck that way. I didn't touch psychedelics for almost 15 years after that. User replies with, I had no awareness I could remember. It's like I stopped existing for 3 hours straight. Interdimensional Travel and the Others. A Salvia Divinorum trip report at ATX Extract, posted by Antipop to EARBUDS.org April 22nd, 2013. Salvia Divinorum is a mysterious plant with mystical properties, far beyond our current scientific explanations. Little is known about its history. Salvia seemingly magically appeared in the Oaxaca Mountains in Mexico only 200 years ago. Native Americans from this area used it for shamanic purposes, but have no native name for this plant due to its relatively new introduction to our planet. In Spanish, salvia is called Los Ojos de la Pastora, or the Eyes of the Shepherdess. But even so-called salvia experts fail to explain salvia's arrival or its intentions. I was told about salvia by a co-worker, who seemed pretty laid back about his experiences with the sacred sage, telling me its effect was nothing more than some minor visionary impairments and uncontrolled hilarity. He'd not taken psychedelics other than a small amount of mushrooms only once. He seemed relatively inexperienced in substance-related activities for the most part, most likely because he had just turned 21. When I would smoke him out with some of my homegrown dank, he would be very stoned after only a hit or two, always leaving me to finish a big bowl meant for 2 of my own. No complaints here though. I figured our tolerance levels were completely different, I being a more experienced user of psychedelics ranging from acid, mushrooms, mescaline and MDMA. Coming to this conclusion, I decided to buy the most potent salvia I could find. My friend was only smoking 10x extract, so I settled on an 80x extract called Purple Sticky Salvia from a local head shop. It was rather expensive for a gram, somewhere around $70 to $80, but I figured you get what you pay for, and purchased the mystery mint, hoping for a decent trip, yet highly skeptical that anything that was still legal would have much of any benefit other than addiction. I drove home in excitement, anxious to try something new, perplexed as to why I had not known about salvia before. Let it be known that the only research I did on salvia was, well, zero. All I really knew about it was what I was told by my friend, a stupid move as any psychonaut can admit, and I will later brutally realise my own errors because of this. It was a warm Tuesday night in California, and I was excited to have a psychedelic experience on a weeknight. My girlfriend and I cuddled up in our bedroom on our cosy bed and smoked a couple of after-dinner bowls while watching some TV. I told her about the salvia, and she said she was game if I was, as long as I tried it first. I grabbed my trusty glass ganja pipe and prepared a large BB-sized ball of salvia by pressing the small purple leaves between my thumb and pointer fingers. My co-worker friend told me I need to take as large of a hit as I could, and to hold it in for as long as humanly possible. This should be no problem, I thought, due to my massive lung capacity allowing me to win many unsanctioned bong-ripping competitions between my friends and me. I blew all the stale air out of my lungs, preparing for a rip of epic proportions. I lit the salvia with my torch, took a gigantic hit, and held it in. While still holding in the previous hit, I inhaled hit number 2 with my remaining lung capacity, and held in both hits together for about 30 seconds. I could feel its effects growing rapidly even before I exhaled. I blew out an enormous cloud of thick purple smoke as quickly as I could in hope to stalemate the increasing rush of salvia's grip. As I exhaled, the room began to fade into a tiny, bright, singular pinpoint of light, like a vortex in the centre of my vision where the TV I was watching had previously been. I then began to hear a voice in my head, unmistakably a foreign voice and not my inner consciousness, of what sounded like a demon. While hearing the voice, a faint image of a horned creature with fangs came into my view. "You wanted this. Now you've got it," it taunted me. Before I smoked salvia, I admittedly gave little respect to the ability of this legal plant to give me the desired psychedelic experience I was hoping for. Boy, was I wrong. The effects came on so strong and so fast that for a moment I knew real terror, instantly realising I had no idea what I was getting myself into.
If you take a psychedelic and you're not afraid you did too much, you didn't do enough.
Terence McKenna once said this. Well, Terence, I definitely took enough this time. As salvia's embrace reached full effect, I was teleported out of my room into a new universe. I was in a scene that seemed out of a rap video. I was in the centre of what was a line shaped like a half circle that opened up to the scene in front of me. The semicircle was to be made of me and other people, but they had not yet been created. This I'll explain shortly. Our semicircle was facing the scene like the audience in a Greek theatre facing the stage. This semicircle design is important because it was the consistent vantage point for what I was witnessing as I travelled between each, for lack of a better word, dimension. I was looking at a group of rappers around a shimmering green pimped out Cadillac with gold rims and trim. The car was bouncing up and down on hydraulics to the beat of blaring rap music. It was not a song I had ever heard before in our usual plane of existence, but it did seem familiar because I knew where the lyrics were heading. As the rapper rhymed, to my right would pop up items of the words the rapper was rapping about. Inanimate objects like money or gold chains were being wrapped into existence next to me, starting from the far right of the imaginary semicircle, getting step by step closer to where my position was on the back centre of this ringed formation. I sensed where the rapper's rhymes were leading to, and as I realised the timing of the song and what words came next, I understood that I was the next thing to be created. But I wasn't going to be created as me, as who I am now in this reality. The rapper's singular lyric that had been reserved for my creation was Pepsi, and I slowly came up from what was the ground as a Pepsi can. As the song blared on, more objects continued to be created to my left, continuing down the line, creating new objects as the rapper rhymed. The weirdest thing about all this was that I felt so much like me, like my human form, totally sober. Not any memory of smoking the salvia, but now in an entirely new plane of existence or parallel universe. As I looked down at my newly formed aluminum body painted in bright blue and red, I resisted, proclaiming, "No, I'm me, not this. My entire existence can't be simply created by some rap song. What the fuck? These fucking rappers in this universe need to be careful what they make songs about if they're creating our world with only the words." Debating this cosmic question within myself seemed to break me free of my mould as a Pepsi can. And soon, I was astral projecting off to the next world. Let's check in with my girlfriend for a moment or two, who was sitting next to me as I took these massive hits. This is what she told me upon my return. As I exhaled, I immediately shot up from my bed and ran full speed into the wall next to my door. She says she has no idea how I built up so much speed in such a small space, but she said I hit the wall so hard that she was surprised I didn't knock the wind out of myself or dislocate my shoulder. I then stumbled into the guest bedroom like a chicken with its head cut off. Feeling my way to the window, I fumbled in confusion with the blinds. During this, I'm shrieking in a terrifying garbled voice, totally unlike my own, screaming at the top of my lungs, "What the fuck is happening? Nah, what the fuck is going on now?" She had no idea what to expect or how long this was to last since we had done no research at all. I turned and stumbled towards her and she smiled reassuringly, and I reached out for her. I walked up towards her and gave her a hug, more like held onto her for dear life. It was during this time of my trip that I was coming from a place I will describe later, and I was falling through a space. I saw my girlfriend's eyes, but they were totally large and the pupils were completely black like the eyes of the popular grey aliens. While tumbling down through space, I saw her eyes. I reached out for her and hugged her as tightly as I could. As I did this, I stopped falling and became aware in my third and final destination, before finally coming back to this reality that we all know and cherish. Standing in our guest room together, I was holding onto her for dear life. Unusually tight, she said, and I wasn't letting go at all. She began to fear I would never let go, and considered calling one of my friends to come over and help her. I then fall to my knees and shout a bit more before crawling my way back up to my feet by way of the wall in our hallway. It seems I was acting out my dreams, but without the parlays of the neurotransmitters released during REM sleep to prevent occurrences like this one. This was the point when I began to come back to reality. Back inside my head, I was now leaving the bizarre rap world and hurtling towards my next adventure. I came to in a world of frog-like creatures in a mysterious forest with massive trees and really brown dirt. In every scene I came into, it seemed the situation that was occurring was already happening, and I had just now popped into the scene gaining consciousness, or awakened for the first time in the middle of it all, but as me, D the human, not whatever being I was becoming in each unique dimension. My view of this new world I was entering was the same as before, me at a point in the middle of the backside of a semicircle, my peripheral vision not extending outward in a line but rounded off like the semicircle extended from either side of my temple. I can compare it to a fisheye camera view of the world before me. There's some trippy video game type of music playing as well. I look down at myself, and I see that I've turned into some type of green, frog-like amphibian. My webbed hands and feet are tied to 4 separate trees to my right and my left, forcing me to sprawl out completely as I lay on the cool dirt of the forest. A group of creatures who look like me but larger are about 15 feet in front of me, hitting some sort of sharp ping-pong ball-like objects in my direction, and in the direction of a couple creatures the same as me to my right and left, arranged like the previous rap world I was in. They were playing some sort of game, and these dangerous ping-pong balls were slicing us open bit by bit. The balls were cutting the corners of my mouth open like how the Joker looks in Batman, slicing my mouth from corner to corner towards my ears, widening it to an unnatural width. While this is happening, I'm screaming as I'm slowly gaining consciousness in this amphibian body who had previously felt no pain. I'm fully aware of what is going on around me, but with the consciousness of me, D, a human, still having no memory of taking any substance, or any memory of being this amphibian, feeling completely like my human self, probably the most sober and aware I've ever been. It was almost more real than reality, if that can even make any sense. As I became aware of myself in this new plane of existence, the other creatures stopped what they were doing and studied me. Seeming astonished, they came over to me highly perplexed as to how I was having feelings and becoming aware. One of them picked me up into its arms and they all gathered around me curiously. I could see that I was being held by what was the queen of these creatures, signified by the feminine crown on the top of her slimy amphibian head. The king was one of the observers in the group. His brilliant gold crown glistened with large red rubies. Dazed and very confused, I looked down perplexed at my frog-like body. The crowd gasped in excitement. "He sees himself," said the queen. "He sees how beautiful he is. This is amazing. The first of his kind." This was too much for me to bear. I had all my wits about me. I was thinking so clearly. What the hell was happening? Are there many versions of me throughout this universe? And am I getting a glimpse of what is already going on in the many parallel planes of my existence throughout our universe? Who knows? All I knew was that my view of the world was shattering before my eyes, and I didn't know if I was prepared yet for the truth. Something flashed, and I was falling once again through space like the stardust I once was in my galactic infancy. As I hurled through space, I began passing by faces of all the people I have known. They were going by so fast like the spinning wheels on a slot machine. One of the faces was my girlfriend's, but all I could see was her eyes, the large black alien eyes as described previously. I reached into the spinning wheel of humanity, clutching my girlfriend with all my might, which began to slow the fall. I slowly floated down into the next bizarre scene in the arms of my loving girlfriend. We fell precisely into place on the semicircle arrangement I had previously described, with her position directly next to me on my right. The pattern of heads continued down the semicircle in both directions once again, very similar to the rap scene. We were all submerged in the earth, not buried, but a part of it, with only from our necks up showing. We were in the front yard facing what was my childhood home. In front of the house is an arrangement of seating similar to a place where Congress would meet. The seats were filled with the most prominent people of our government and governments around the world, as well as scientists, my mum, and my dad sitting right next to George W. Bush. They were all staring intently at the semicircle scene in front of them. This is the first time my memory is kind of blurry about how things next transpired. Probably because I was so overwhelmed with my previous two journeys. Whatever the reason, I don't quite remember how they were doing it, but the group of scientists in front of us were evoking the creation of people up from the earth just like the rap scene. It started to my far right of the semicircle. The first head rose from the earth into something that I don't quite remember. This sequence of events continued from right to left, going from person to person, raising them from the dirt to become the new form. It was getting closer and closer to being my turn. The whole time this was happening, I was screaming at the scene, "What the fuck is happening? Nah, what the fuck is going on?" My girlfriend, who was submerged in the earth next to me, was looking over at me, trying to calm me down. She was telling me, "Stay calm and don't panic. It's alright, just let go and go with it." It was her turn now, and she was taking it so calmly I was thinking to myself, what the fuck is this? It can't be real. I decided not to give in to whatever was going on around me, and as I let out a war cry of a scream, I began to rip myself up out of the earth while my parents and girlfriend yelled at me to stop. "No, D, it's all gonna be okay, just relax," they warned. Fuck relaxing, I thought. What the hell is going on? I pulled myself out of the ground like breaking through some kind of fabric. Gooey remains peeled off me as I rose to my feet, taking my human form. This bizarre birthing process was now complete, and I was now fully alert and walking in the onlooker's dimension. I flailed my arms wildly in front of me, heading towards my house and the crowd of those who had been watching and studying us. As I reached my house, it was like the set of a Hollywood movie. I began knocking over props of what had been my house, my room. Everything was toppling over as I ran into things. Pushing the props were like hurdles in track and field, all over the place as I advanced into the fake set that I had once believed to be my home. I then stumbled over one of the props and fell onto the ground in my childhood hallway. My girlfriend had popped out of the earth too, and was now chasing me to try and console me. I soon was told that she was on their side, whoever they were, and she was an alien sent to watch over me and keep me in control. I couldn't believe it. I was crushed, betrayed. I crawled on my knees down the hallway, trying to escape from her in this nightmare. I began running my hands along the walls, knocking pictures off in the process, just trying to get a grip on something to help me back up to my feet. As I was clawing the walls of my childhood home, I slowly began to fade back into this world, the effects of the salvia beginning to diminish. I was now back in the hallway of my apartment in the real world, where this whole journey began. I was on my knees, scrambling away from the guest room towards my bedroom. I looked behind me and saw my girlfriend coming from out of the guest room. A sudden panic overwhelmed me. There she is, coming to get me. I thought this in my half-confused delusional state, and still had the faint feeling from my salvia-induced hallucinations that my girlfriend was a part of a giant conspiracy that I had just uncovered. She looked slightly worried, but not very threatening. As I slowly came to realizing that I'd just taken salvia and gone on a wild psychedelic trip, and was just now returning to touch my feet back on the ground again, I stood up, walked the rest of the way to my bedroom, and plopped onto my bed. I was starting to feel like myself again, but with some minor after effects. As I sat on the bed, everything seemed to be sucked to my right, the direction in which I ran full speed into the wall. My girlfriend's hair seemed to be flowing to the right, along with everything else in the room. I had the feeling I was leaning completely sideways, and I kept asking if I was sitting up straight, which I was. I felt very excited and euphoric, like a beautiful, mellow mushroom trip, and seemed grateful for the experience even though it scared the living shit out of me. Wow. That was amazing, I kept saying. What an adventure. I feel blessed to have experienced that, you know. But there's no mistaking that salvia had taught me a brutal lesson. It had answered my challenge tenfold. I still remember it all very clearly today, like it had actually happened in real life. The events are so vivid and realistic, I believe something totally beyond our understanding may have taken place. I even have faint scars on both sides of my face from the corners of my mouth extending about an inch towards my ears. Both my girlfriend and I had never seen the scars until that very night. I now have a healthy fear and newfound respect for Salvia Divinorum. Whether salvia is the eyes of the shepherdess allowing us to see what is beyond our current boundaries, or an intergalactic propulsion source meant to unlock the chemistry within our brain allowing us to travel to vast galaxies only explored by highly advanced extraterrestrial life, there will be a purpose for it. Though the relationship between man and salvia may still be in its inception, we are evolving to a point where we can find new, life-changing information as we gain a greater understanding of the messages delivered to us through the offspring of Mother Nature. marvellous, joyful, encouraging journey. An Amanita muscaria and Hawaiian baby woodrose trip report, posted by Lucky57 to earbud.org September 1st, 2018. If it matters, I'm 6'6", height-weight proportionate. I took these substances at home by myself at 4:20 PM Mountain Daylight Savings Time on August 11th, 2018. This instance was the first time I'd ever taken any sort of mushroom. I'd read that keeping the dosage low is a good idea on the first try. I'd taken Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds before in combination with morning glory seeds, with somewhat unsatisfactory results: nausea, lack of intensity, etc. My mindset was extremely relaxed in the matter. I felt quite confident about what I was doing and that nothing would happen that I couldn't handle psychologically. I'd read that having a sitter, at least on the first try, was a good idea. But I consider myself a very stable person, one who's endured a couple of so-called bad trips along with some very traumatic experiences in life. But having survived them all and being in my 60s, I didn't feel prone to any sort of psychological breakdown. I didn't wish to take on an empty stomach. I felt that might lead to nausea. I tried various preparation methods with morning glory seeds, all of which were taken on an empty stomach with the experience of nearly intolerable nausea. About 90 minutes prior to ingestion of the caps and seeds, I ate a turkey and cheese sandwich with a little mustard and a little caffeine-free Diet Coca-Cola. I tore off small pieces of the mushroom and chewed them all carefully. It didn't really taste that bad either, sort of earthy, musky. I took all 4 seeds at once and chewed them, leaving them under my tongue for a minute, then swallowing them. Then, I took 2 dimenhydrinate, not diphenhydramine I must say, or Benadryl. They're these anti-nausea tablets, and alongside that I ate a clementine orange since I'd heard that acidic fluids help to potentiate the alkaloids in the mushrooms and seeds. After about an hour and 45 minutes, I took a booster dose of half a cap of Amanita muscaria, as well as 2 Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds. Then, after about 2 hours and 30 minutes, or 2 hours and 45, I began to experience some mild closed-eye visions. It was like sitting on a big outdoor balcony with a 180-degree view of the aurora borealis. Gradually, the visions became more intense, much more colourful, and much more complex, with constantly changing abstract patterns. It was like watching multiple movie screens at once, being able to pay attention to all of them at once and note what was happening in each one of them. Sometimes all of the screens would meld to form one single image, and occasionally, figures of faces, which I initially thought of as being grotesque, menacing or perverse, were a little bit intimidating at first. But I knew that resisting these figures or trying to run from them would intensify the slight anxiety I first felt. So, I willingly accepted them, and I thought of them as being my friends rather than enemies, which caused me to smile. I thought of my smile as moving through space under a strobe light, like a river of undulating smiles which made me smile all the harder. I began to feel joy at knowing that I was under the influence and so much in control of it. I conceived of reaching out to touch the visions, and extended my arm upwards above my body while lying on my back, which was about 4 hours and 30 minutes after the initial dose. It was as if I'd dived right into the middle of all these marvellously coloured patterns and pieces of jewel-like light sources. They were inside of me now, making me feel happy, secure and warm. They filled me up, and I exploded into 1,000 whirling, multicoloured galaxies, all sending off sparks of light. Yet, even though I'd exploded, I could stand and watch myself as a separate observer, even though I'd experienced that sensation of filling up and so joyfully exploding. The galaxies reconvened to reconstitute myself, and suddenly I conceived of a spectacular light source that began rapidly entering my body and exiting, back and forth, going faster and faster, and at times, it seemed to be facilitating inside and outside of my body, and at other times, I was facilitating inside and outside of it. And then, both were happening at the very same time. When written in black and white on paper, it doesn't quite make much sense. The sense of space and time were more fluid. Kept going faster and faster, and as the frequency rose, I was able to hear a sound that rose in pitch to match this frequency. At last, the light and I were completely one, and then we began twirling and rotating through an ocean of colours. Our form changed constantly and would encompass the normal size of my body to perhaps 100 square miles back and forth. Throughout all of this, I'm aware of the constant process of change, renewal, and acceptance of the rapidity with which it was all happening. So much was happening in such a short time that time itself seemed to slow down. It was at this point I thought to myself, I think I'm pretty much peaking about now, which caused another huge smile and a sense of joy and satisfaction to watch over me. The fact that I was actually able to enjoy a hallucinogenic experience, especially after my rather strict upbringing, made me feel very pleased. It had been about 5 hours now since I took the first dose of mushrooms and seeds. I conceived that something sacred and otherworldly had entered me and that I had entered it. Some majestic force that was making me lose my own identity, myself, repeatedly, over and over again. For some reason it seemed natural to me to find myself over and over again, and to continually identify with it. As time passed, I became weary of it, and it dawned on me that perhaps I was being called upon by this force to relinquish possession of myself, to let go, and perhaps even to die. While the same visions of colours and vibration and frequencies were right in front of me and inside of me, it was as if I had a separate dream about riding a horse out in the country. I came to a wide and beautiful crystal clear stream where my horse drank from it. A very handsome elderly man, similar to Gandalf, with white hair and a big thick long white beard, rode up on his own beautiful white horse on the other side of the stream. His black eyes sparkled, and he smiled broadly at me with his deeply creased face, instantly winning my trust. He slowly crossed over to my side of the stream, holding my eyes with his steady gaze and smile. "Ride with me," he said. "You'll see. It'll be beautiful." With only slight hesitation, I began to ride with him, and it was now as if I had a trail partner, someone I could trust in and rely upon. The wonderful visions continued. Only now I had someone to share them with, and that made me very happy. It dawned upon me that I had given myself up to death itself, and it was truly wonderful. Never had I been happier or felt more satisfied or complete than in that moment. It was so reassuring to think that this is what death is like. Thinking of death as a friend, a companion, a trail partner. This was such a refreshing thought for me. 7 hours after the initial dose, the visions began to weaken, and my thoughts became less compelling. Around the 8-hour mark, the last few flickers of colour in my vision had slipped away. I lay awake for an additional 4 hours after this, unable to sleep, and around the 12-hour mark I finally drifted off, around 4:30 AM the next day. I had some fairly routine, unremarkable dreams. I plan to take the drugs earlier in the day next time, so I won't be up all night again. I slept until 1 in the afternoon and felt very mildly hungover, although nothing nearly as bad as a bad alcohol hangover. Also of note is that the mushrooms and seeds had a fairly rapid laxative effect. After 3 hours I had a large bowel movement, rapidly followed by another liquid bowel movement. It was an extremely satisfying experience though, I must say, giving me several whole-body shivers, almost like having an orgasm. It almost made me laugh to think that it was similar to what a woman must feel when giving birth. While squatting on the bog, I got totally ensconced in watching some light patterns on the bathroom wall for a few minutes. It made me laugh when I realised what I was doing, sitting there with a wad of toilet paper in my hand and a dirty bum. All in all though, I must say that this was a fantastic, rewarding and growing experience. Up until 4 years ago, I hadn't done any hallucinogens since the mid-1970s as a late teen, early 20s lad. At that time, there was still a terrible stigma attached to it all, at least in my mind. I took LSD once under really poor circumstances and had quite the bad time. Mescaline was way more fun. It was about 4 years ago that I took morning glory seeds in Hawaiian baby woodrows, and I did this several times with somewhat unsatisfactory results. And after trying to figure out how to obtain illegal substances, recently heard about Amanita muscaria mushrooms and Hawaiian baby woodrow seeds. I got the mushrooms online. I think there may be some risk to ordering the mushrooms. Seems to be questionable legality to owning the dried versions of it. But thankfully, nothing happened with it this time at all, and hopefully never will. My experience with the mantis beings by the user Space Hello, posted to the Experiences subreddit 1 year ago. So this is something that is on my mind every day since it happened. I took about 7 grams of mushrooms and was teleported into another realm where I saw the mantis type entities and communicated with them. It was unlike any other trip. I ate the mushrooms and took a shower on the come up. They hit fast and I actually started tripping while still in the shower. That's when I saw the first one. I had my eyes closed and this beautiful green and gold bug-like entity appeared in front of the blackness of my closed eyes. It gave me a feeling of peace and love, telling me to finish washing up and to go to bed. Well, when an entity like that tells you what to do, you listen. I finished up and crawled into bed with nothing but a small lamp to light the room. This is when I blasted off. I felt like I was being ripped out of my body. Like when you're half asleep and you feel like you're falling, except upwards, and I kept going and going and going. They took me into a room that had no windows and looked like an old back room in an office building. It was weird because I knew I wasn't there, and that they did this because they thought it would be familiar to me and calm me down. So this is when the green and gold one appeared. No words were used, might I add. It was all communication through ideas and emotion. It asked me if I wanted to see the truth, to which I said yes. We were then looking at a top-down view of other mantids. These were the basic brown, black and dark gold coloured ones, and I could tell they were workers. They were walking around in a room between what looked like RPG game tables. There were hundreds of these tables, and they were walking around in between them like they were keeping an eye on them. Without asking, the being then told me that these were the many different human worlds, and that they facilitate them. They're basically the game masters to this thing we call life, and Earth isn't the only human world out there. It didn't look like they were intervening at all, just closely watching and almost taking notes. Every once in a while, something reminds me of this trip, and I get wrapped up in it again. Has anyone else seen these entities before? Now, here's another really interesting post from the same subreddit, by ImpossibleTeach8166, posted 6 months ago. Standing with mantis being staring at Earth from space. A few years ago I experienced a remarkable visionary contact episode which was initiated through a breakthrough mushroom trip, where I ingested 5 grams of cubensis while wearing a blindfold. As the trip began to peak, the common hallucinogenic rainbow pinwheel spirals began to fade away, to reveal a silhouette of an insectoid-like figure. This being immediately initiated communication, not in the form of words but in general impressions, feelings and imagery. The next moment the scene changed abruptly to that of a third-person perspective of myself standing with this 7-foot-tall mantis entity beside me, and we were both gazing out a large window upon the Earth from space. It communicated in a kind of synesthesia type of understanding, in a way that's hard to describe or summarize with any great detail. Just being in its presence radiated much of the following information as an intuitive-based self-inference. It was similar to being in the presence of a human managerial professional that you are able to intuit their role or function or vibe from. That being said, here are the general impressions I formed. They are ancient and advanced in a way that's almost incomprehensible, a level 3 galactic civilization. They assume the role of stewards, managers, gardeners of developing higher consciousness displaying organisms throughout the galaxy, universe, and possibly multiverse. They have been subtly modifying and coaxing humankind forward from the fringes of our perceived reality, and may be responsible for mankind's comparatively rapid cognitive evolution, and that this process has recently been pushed into urgent overdrive. They are responsible for the seeding of DMT and psilocybin-containing organisms throughout the Earth's ecosystem as a potential development driver and means of communication. My personal read on this being is that it was a stoic, enlightened scientist interested in the diversity of expressions of life and consciousness throughout the galaxies. It had a paternal, wise old master, older brother kind of vibe to it. It was very Vulcan-esque, hyperlogical. It was encouraging, understanding, and with a muted sense of humour. It conveyed this sense of deep sadness at the plight of humans and of the ecological state of the Earth, and encouraged action to help in some way. No specifics given. Just do something, help yourself, help your neighbours, try to heal the world. Just try, essentially. I also formed the impression, after having this experience, that the universe is some kind of vast simulated or digitized hyperdimensional reality whose inner mainframe can become accessible through higher states of consciousness, and that these beings have reached a level where they can almost act as programmers, being able to manage, modify, and intrude upon our three-dimensional bubble in ways that seem impossible. I awoke the next morning to find a praying mantis insect, normal size, that was waiting for me outside in an odd and obvious spot, which registered to me as a signal from them that this experience was actually real. So here's another post by the user GreyHat111 posted 5 months ago. Saw mantids on 3.75 grams of psilocybin-infused chocolates. At the peak of the trip, the walls of this reality became fuzzy, and I began falling down within myself into some other dimension where I could see 4D plate-like grid structures that made up a dimensional space we can't normally see that overlaps our own. In this space, the constructs of the dimension looked like orange, purple, grey and black lines that crossed at intersections in every direction of each point where the grids were located. In this space, I saw the mantids. They were people-sized mantids that had jobs and involved the choices that we make in linear time. If you've ever seen how older animated movies are made, where they take a bunch of still images and run them together to make a motion picture, well, that's kind of our reality. Each timestamp or choice we make in linear time, these infinite mantids carry each of them off into some unknown space beyond that, storing them in the Akashic records, if you will. They are the keepers of our reality, and they are all around us at all times, just watching, feeling, harvesting, keeping. Each time I would close my eyes, I would see one of them just standing next to me in this other space, and it'd freak me out because it's just bam, right there with its big-ass head and skinny body. Apparently it was my guide, my teacher, my keeper, just always there, watching me, guiding me on. I sat and watched them go about their work for a while, and then just faded off into the rest of the trip, watching movies for the rest of the night. All in all though, it was an amazing experience, and it's honestly crazy what these mushrooms can show you. We had some absolute bangers on and were dancing like no one was watching. The vibe was immaculate and everyone was buzzing with positive energy. Like always when I take acid, I felt the best version of myself. We had some more weed and chilled out on the sofas for a bit, and this is where things started to get a bit messy for me. I began feeling a bit nauseous. I let my friends know and one of them passed me a sick bowl while I remained seated. I remember feeling extremely annoyed because I'd never really had any sort of nausea on acid before, and it was ruining my good mood. I didn't end up throwing up, but the general nausea worsened. Started feeling really lethargic and a bit dissociated, like I wasn't truly present in my body. I was barely coherent to the others. I remember one of my friends explaining to one of the others that I might be going through an ego death. They hadn't heard of the concept, you see. Roughly 25 minutes pass and I'm feeling much worse. Much worse. I tell everyone I'm going to go lay down in my bed. Takes me a while to get upstairs, but once I'm there I sit down and look out the window. I remember feeling an immense amount of dread at this point. Started to question whether it was actually acid I'd taken because it felt like I was dying. I couldn't get comfortable in my room. I ended up crawling around the top of the stairs and curled up on the carpet. I must have gotten comfy as I lay there for a bit. My friends came to check on me and when one of them asked if I was okay, apparently I said, "I feel like I'm dying, but it feels so good." Around 20 minutes later the nausea had started to dissipate, but my mind still feels a bit foggy. I return to my room and lie down in my bed. I stick my AirPods in and listen to a song called Welcome Home Son. It gave me such a positive feeling and all my nausea had gone and I truly felt amazing again. I continued to vibe to the music, but irrationally, I paused the song and quickly pulled out both earbuds. I've no idea why, but I did. I sat there for a moment, when all of a sudden I felt something I've never felt before. I felt a presence of some sort. Something which connected me with everything and everyone. I looked out my window, into the stars, and all I can think is, holy shit, it's real. I was feeling the presence of a higher power. It had no face, but when I looked into the stars I was certain it was there, something that is connecting us all. I was absolutely certain of this. I jumped back onto my bed and my hands are on my head in complete disbelief. I simply cannot comprehend what I'm experiencing. I begin shouting, oh my fucking god, it's real. In terms of visuals, I saw white blue dots all across my arms. It was like they were glowing. Then I noticed I see these same dots on everything else I was looking at too, just adding to the whole connected with everything feeling going on. After probably about 40 minutes of me trying to comprehend everything, I returned downstairs and sat everyone down, then explained to them what I had actually just gone through. I go on to say, guys, I don't know if there's a God, but there is something. I've never been a religious person, so to speak, and hadn't ever mentioned anything like this before, so they were all quite intrigued, especially the two friends that also dropped acid. But despite the positive responses, they seemed a little withdrawn on what I was saying, which is completely understandable, as without experiencing it, you simply couldn't understand its profundity. Well, we continued the night off with more music, some great talks, and a level of bonding you only get with psychedelics. In conclusion, looking back on the trip now, I find it crazy how unprepared I was for such an experience. Because of this, I didn't take an opportunity to note any of my feelings or thoughts down. It would have been amazing if I had anything other than just the memories. All my previous acid trips have been amazing for self-growth, for my mental well-being, and to help steer my life in the direction I want. I thought I'd gone as deep as you could with this substance, but my oh my was I humbled in that respect. If I had to guess, it was probably the copious amounts of cannabis I consumed that sent me to this other level. But at the same time, I can't help but wonder whether this presence, this higher being, had caused me to feel the way I did at the start, leading me to go upstairs alone, so I could be enlightened. As mentioned, I've never been a religious person, always identified as agnostic, although it was quite half-hearted. But after this experience, I truly believe there's something out there. I have no idea what exactly, but there is something. After doing some research, it seemed really familiar with the universal mind lattice idea, an omnidirectional net of toroidal fountains and drains of infinite iridescent love and energy, connecting every being in existence. For For the past few months, I'd been considering trying DMT for the first time, but I was never really sure if I was ready. Although, after this, I feel like it's time. I no longer have any anxiety about taking it. It truly feels like a sign from the universe. Choosing to Stay in My Body, a ketamine and 5-MeO-DMT trip report by Inner Explorer, posted to EARBUDS September 29, 2017. A chemically induced, safe near-death experience. 5-MeO-DMT and ketamine intramuscular report. Set and setting. Relaxed, having eaten about 2 hours prior. Also having done a long meditation in nature earlier in the day. A 5-MeO-DMT playlist was on. I had a dose of 4 mg of 5-MeO-DMT hydrochloride intramuscular and 50 mg of ketamine intramuscular. I'd prepared a sterile vial with 200 mg of 5-MeO-DMT in 20 ml of bacteriostatic water run through a micron filter, resulting in a concentration of 10 mg. I'd also acquired a pharmaceutical vial of anescate ketamine, which had a concentration of 50 mg. I drew 1 ml of the ketamine solution into one insulin syringe and 0.4 ml of 5-MeO-DMT into another insulin syringe. I planned to inject the ketamine syringe first since it was a larger volume to inject and would give me enough time to inject the syringe containing the 5-MeO-DMT. I wanted to undertake this experience because I've been long curious about the synergy between tryptamines and dissociatives, particularly ketamine and 5-MeO-DMT, and I'd also been curious about 4-ACO-DMT and dyschloroketamine, but that may be for another time. I felt like this combination of medicines taken in an intentional, healing context might allow me to touch the very core of my being and know deeper the concept of self-love. I'd participated in 2 ayahuasca ceremonies a week prior, and what came out of those ceremonies was a need to love myself ever more deeply. In my internal process, I reflected on this concept but found that I did not know what it truly felt like to love myself, and to engage in that practice over a longer period of time. It was in light of this that I decided to undertake this experience, which would prove to be one of the most powerful experiences of my entire life. After thanking the medicine for arriving in my life and giving me the opportunity for awakening and wellness, I injected the syringe containing the 50 mg of ketamine into my left thigh at a slow rate. It perhaps took about 30 seconds to complete the injection, and I then injected the second syringe containing the 5-MeO-DMT into my right thigh at the same rate. I turned on my playlist, which started with LYTMI by J. Jagdish. I laid down and turned my focus within and to my breathing. Within the first 5 minutes, I began to recognize the initial effects of ketamine as well as 5-MeO-DMT, as if they were starting at opposite ends. The white static vibration ketamine seemed to be coming from the left, while the smooth wave-like vibration of 5-MeO-DMT seemed to be coming from the right, merging together like water filling all the gaps in a Tetris game. The moment of union was incredible to behold. Each breath that I took brought me deeper and deeper into a relaxed ecstasy, with absolutely no worries or cares, just letting go deeper and deeper into the bliss that was flowing down from my head into the rest of my body. This feeling continued to grow until I felt like I might purge. Somehow, I managed to get up and walk or waddle across the room, grabbing the trash can and bringing it back to my bed where I sat next to it to anticipate a release. Instead of a purge, the release transformed from a nauseous feeling to tears and sadness in my heart that gradually released over time. All the time of self-neglect, all the self-loathing for no real reason, all the time of not knowing my value, I let it all go. And as I did this, I began to realize how completely out of it I truly was. I didn't remember where I was or what I'd even taken, and I didn't even fully associate with my body. The level of dissociation was much more intense than single doses of 4 mg of 5-MeO-T or 50 mg of ketamine alone. There was a part of me that began to feel somewhat concerned. Whilst I didn't really know it at the time, I'd begun to reach the peak, and at this point, this was when all things merged into one. I was the wall, I was my mother, I was my father, I was the air, I was the water. I was also the cosmos, and I was also the spirit. It was by now that I thought I'd died. This was a new kind of ego death for me, because rather than feeling like I was going to die, I just felt like I'd already died, but that my spirit was still hanging in my body. It was at that moment that I felt like just a small breeze would have blown me straight out. There was a moment where I began thinking that this was truly it, that I'd done everything I came to this life to do, that I'd already left my mark on people's hearts, and that by my death that message would be magnified. I really began thinking that it was my time. I was fascinated by how easy that felt to just slip out of my body. Dead and still living relatives appeared in the room. I could both see and feel them welcoming me into the afterlife, just being present with me. But then I reminded myself that this was the life I had chosen. This was the body I had chosen at this moment out of all the quintillion possibilities. I made the choice that I would keep breathing. I would fight to stay. And with that decision, I realized that I had full control over the energy that I'd come to know was me. It was like the water inside the vessel of my body. Through a meditative state where I just focused on flowing energy down from my crown all the way into my root, I found that I became more grounded. I felt peace once again, knowing I would be staying. Though moving through this was one of the most scary moments I have had on medicine, and would recommend having a sitter for this type of experience. But after that moment, I felt like I unlocked all genetic memory contained in my body. The rush of information was powerful, intense, and beautiful all at once. I found myself channeling the energy of a powerful shaman, one that was not powerful by force, but powerful in spirit. I was shown how I carry this power within me, but I have been afraid to use it. And that was part of the reason why I thought so poorly of myself. Taking a deep breath, I felt the magic power that I possessed. Power I had come into contact with before, but not in such a direct experience kind of way. I could feel the flow of all events, of all realities coalescing into one big flow that I was witness to. Feeling deep within me, I came to know my deepest nature, that of love. I felt my heart burst open. I could remember the echo of the words I'd spoken at the beginning of the experience. To love myself. I mean, how could I not love myself? This being of love and power that strove for humility and to help others arrive at the same realization. I came into a protector archetype, a messiah archetype, and a healer archetype all at once. I began to feel my body all over. My arms, my face, my back, my legs, my head. All worthy, all deserving of my deepest love. I then began to see myself through the eyes of my lover. Each inch of skin, each strand of hair holy. Not that I was better than anyone, but that I was unique. The love of God flowed through my body, taking this love through generations of experiences. Through the path of this road of life that I was walking with my brothers and sisters, all curiously wandering the path back to God. The energy coursed through my body in a way that I had never quite felt before. How good and powerful it felt to be a man with no shame. It was here that I shed the shame that I'd carried throughout my life, of me being a victim of sexual assault, of me being persecuted for my interest in altered states of consciousness, and of me being a sensitive man who could be easily hurt in my youth. All of this was gone and replaced with a powerful flowing river. I felt like a god. I was looking through my body with the eyes of God, and I could feel God speaking through me, reminding me of how much potential I carried. I stood up in front of the mirror and looked at myself in my nakedness. I am beautiful, I thought to myself. A thought I had never quite allowed myself to feel because I felt such shame around being a man. I exploded into a blissful ecstasy as strength surged through my body, leading me through intricate stretches and body movements that felt completely intuitive and centuries old. I felt like a marionette that God was shaking out, moving out all the stagnant energy. I felt immeasurable gratitude to experience this level of clarity, to know how I create my reality constantly. I chose to create a positive reality for as long as I lived. I committed to doing this work over the coming weeks and months. I would stop feeling sorry for myself. I would shed the shell of unworthiness to myself and embrace the deep wisdom within, my loving nature, the beauty of my body, and the desire to help others heal themselves. I could feel my very DNA rearranging itself as I came to this revelation. So it was at this point I looked at my watch. Only 32 minutes had elapsed. It felt like I'd been in the experience for hours upon hours. I continued to be in a deep meditative state for another 30 minutes before reaching out to a friend to relate as much as I could about this experience so that I would not forget it. This report has been a highlight of the most prominent moments, but I think other aspects will come up as time goes on. I'd consider this one of the most powerful experiences of my life, because I felt like I was able to float right to the edge of death, almost in essence arriving at death itself, while simultaneously choosing to stay in my body. Words cannot describe how complete and deep that moment truly was. Going forward from this moment on, I would say that the combination of dissociatives and tryptamines, particularly 5-MeO-DMT, have incredible therapeutic potential on the transpersonal level of conscious healing and awareness. I'd say this is definitely an area that warrants further exploration as we continue to evolve our understanding of how consciousness operates in the human body and mind. I'd not recommend this experience to anyone not thoroughly experienced with either 5-MeO-DMT or ketamine, as the experience can be extremely disorienting and potentially panic-inducing. On the other hand, I find that this experience can be highly worthwhile for individuals to realize their true nature through the dramas of life and existence. May all beings know happiness. May all beings know true self. May all beings know peace. Om Mani Padme Hum. The Master Plan. An MDMA, Salvia divinorum, 5-MeO-DMT, nitrous oxide and cannabis strip report by 138. Posted at earbud.org, January 28, 2004. First of all, I must say that I'm a well-rounded psychonaut with many profound experiences in my bag. Having done all these substances on several different occasions singly, and done a few of them in combinations, I was ready for this catapulting combination of substances. Being the only day that I didn't have 1,000 things going on this spring break, my friend and I decided to have a blowout blast from the future while dragging along the past. It was a normal weekday with nothing to do except reach alternate dimensions. We'd gotten a friend to hook up my friend C and myself with 5 red smiley face MDMA pills that had these little white blotches on them. We'd initially planned on starting our experience at midnight so the timing would be easy, but we ended up running about 15 minutes behind schedule. Upon our nearing home, about 15 minutes away from our doorstep, C and I dropped one pill at 12:15, and this was where the night had begun. At 0 hours, C and I downed 1 MDMA pill each on the car ride home. 14 minutes in, C and I arrive at my house. 35 minutes and I'm starting to feel the rise of serotonin throughout my body, as is C. At 1 hour, C and I each down 1 more MDMA pill, just as our first pills are starting to kick in fully. An hour and 30 in, being the potheads that we are, we get the urge to smoke a bowl of high-grade cannabis, and then did just that. Didn't do much, however, but whatever, all is good. 2 hours and 25 minutes in. We're having deep introspection upon ourselves with great joy. We decide to split the last MDMA pill we had. We split the red smiley in half with a razor blade. Half of the pill, each down the hatch. Now, this is where the experience turns from two friends having fun rolling into a mesmerizing spiritual rebirth of cosmic proportions. The addition of short and fast-acting, powerful hallucinogens. 2 hours and 40 minutes in, we decide to add a more spiritual twist to the experience with the scientific mystery that is salvia. Feeling good, we decide to go for a large dose. 3 bowls of salvia each smoked out of a bong with no water in it. The usual irregular herbal taste was quite present, but had no effect on us until the start of my 3rd bowl full of the salvia leaves. The strangely familiar sideways gravity of salvia was applied to my body upon exhaling the 3rd bowl. Then nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. I got this strange pressure in my head that shot down my back, as if a spear had been jammed down my spine, and it then began twisting me around this centre as if I was in an office chair. I then started to hear this sound that sounded like the breeze on a really windy day. And with this natural wind sound came the birth of tricoloured ivy that started growing out of the walls. These red, green and blue ivy vines, worm-like, weren't like patterns projected onto the wall. They literally grew out of the wall in a horizontal manner, braiding like the tentacles in the movie Evolution. This experience was strangely different than salvia alone. It even started to scare me as the salvia grabbed my body, twisting it harder and harder. As soon as the fear took over, I reached an incredibly peaceful state and realized how we evolved, and that we are cellular-based creatures like plants. Once the peak was over, I looked at my friend and saw myself as a friend from a past. An alternate dimension, déjà vu if you will. It snapped into and out of my head just as quick as I handed my friend a lighter, like the person who I became had done to me a year earlier. At 2 hours and 50 minutes, I'm now at a peaceful state with the effects of salvia present. So, we decide to mix in some 5-MeO-DMT with it, which in my opinion is one of the best things to do while under the influence of MDMA. I took out my tinfoil spoon and a cone straw made of paper, and we each freebased 5 milligrams of the chemical. The loss of ego was taken a lot more lightly than it normally is, but we immediately became lost in reality. Observing it still, but having no idea what the hell was actually going on. There was this incredible tingling feeling alongside this. Felt like a 9-volt battery to the tongue, but throughout my whole body instead. And as this happened, just then, the visuals exploded. Geometric fractal patterns started projecting onto the wall like linear Cheshire cats from Alice in Wonderland that inverted themselves outward. They were like those water tubes that are like stretched out donuts. My hands started to sweat a little bit, so I drank some water. C then joked that all we needed now was a cartridge of nitrous to take things up a bit. And I, not thinking in the moment, said fuck it, let's do 2. 2 hours and 53 minutes in, and C said that it was too obliterated to do a nitrous at the moment. I took the words of Jim Morrison, I believe in a prolonged arrangement of the senses to achieve the unknown, into play. I noticed the Doors' The End happened to be playing as I inhaled the first balloon, but forgot what was playing by the time I was inhaling the second one. Sitting on the couch in my living room, I was able to see the whole apartment as I exhaled the nitrous. A few seconds later, and I became numb to the world, only feeling as if I was an entity barely knowing what was going on. The world morphed into another dimension containing a crazy-ass black and red waving checkerboard pattern of diamonds. This took my depth perception and melded it to that pattern. Then, I had the most profound experience of my life. Instead of hearing the normal ringing sounds that nitrous yields, I heard a demonic laugh. This was not of my voice, nor C's, and after this, I then yelled out the words in the same demonic voice.
You stupid kids. You have no idea what is going on.
This irked the hell out of me. I didn't tell myself to say this. It just came out automatically. I then felt as if I was an old man who was about to die. I turned to my right and looked at C as if I'd just seen a ghost. But it was I who felt like a ghost, as I yelled out, "Holy shit!" and stared at him in anticipation as the door's the end was coming to its peak. I could feel each heartbeat as if it was my last, while staring blankly into my friend's eyes as if looking at his soul. I felt the game world's existence in all of its actuality, feeling as if I'd just figured out the answer to the paradox that is life and death, the so-called master plan. The music subsided at the same time the nitrous had, returning me to the normal ecstasy feeling strapped with the most profound experience of my entire life. I remember thinking about what had just happened and hearing the words, "Well, who's getting the last laugh now?" I basically just sat there in awe until 4:18, when I got the idea to smoke some weed. 4 hours and 5 minutes in, whilst puffing on a joint of low-grade cannabis and sipping on a beer, I came up with the philosophy that you can't define something inside of itself, so the only way to define life is to die. But since I don't want to do that just yet, I came up with the living philosophy that you haven't lived until you stare death right in the face. In complete and utter awe of what had happened in the past 4 hours, I drank one more beer and discussed the experiences with my good friend C, who was there with me the whole time. At 6:41 AM, 6 hours and 26 minutes after first ingesting the MDMA, I finish a final beer and smoke a bowl of pot. And boom, I was out like a light. This experience was the greatest thing that I have ever felt and observed. I've had many deeply spiritual experiences before with a wide range of substances, like my first shroom trip or my last Foxy trip. But this was by far the best. Definitely fun, definitely insightful, and I definitely learned a lot about myself and the world. I wouldn't have traded anything in the world for this once-in-a-lifetime experience. But I must say to you all, remember, if you're going to do anything like this, please, safety first. Oneness Beyond One, a mushroom trip report posted to the Vivec Discord. The sun rose and shone through my window as Tuesday reared its head. Over the past 3 weeks I'd been feeling a calling to trip, a calling stronger than I'd really felt before. I'd been planning this trip for a week, trying to mentally prepare myself and ensure that nothing would interrupt me while I was tripping. I almost didn't take this opportunity to trip though, because of a dream I had that Tuesday morning. Most of the other memories of that dream have escaped me, but the important part was that I dreamt that my mum had caught me tripping. Near the end of the dream though, I recall my older brother taking me aside and saying something along the lines of, "Don't worry, I've done it too. I'll handle it for you." When, in reality, my older brother is not the type of person who would trip at all, so I found it strange that he was defending me. Because of this dream, I decided to go about my day extremely carefully and mindfully, ensuring that everything was just right and that I was in a good enough headspace to be tripping. So after taking care of some chores and cleaning my room, organising it to be the perfect space for tripping, I refilled my water bottle, made some tea, and at around 5 PM, I began my usual pre-trip meditation. When I felt the waves of calm flow through me, I knew it was time to take it. I ate the whole mushroom chocolate bar, and boy was it delicious. I felt perfectly prepared to explore the depths of my mind. The come up was a little rocky. I started to notice it in the form of some light nausea and anxiety, though I didn't usually feel anxious coming up. It felt like the nausea came in waves, where it would slightly intensify and then subside, repeating that process over and over again. I started to notice my first visuals when I was staring at the posters in my room. They would shimmer a little bit, and almost appear as if they were falling or fading into the background, while another copy of it would appear in front of it as it fades. I laid down and took it all in. Aside from the nausea, I was having a great time, just riding the high, watching the colours and geometry around me gently rise in intensity. Then at some point, I decided to quiet my mind a little and close my eyes. I felt a presence there right behind my own eyelids. It was almost as if they were knocking from the inside of my head, saying, "Hello? Anyone there?" I was so fucking astonished that I opened my eyes and basically jumped out of my bed reeling. I mean, what the hell even was that? Is this what meeting entities is like? I shook off my nervousness and laid back down again, trying to settle the nausea and closing my eyes. When these strangers spoke, it was much less like audible speech and more akin to their words popping up in my mind. I then said something back to whoever this was in my head. "Hello?" My speech rang out into the space around me. The stranger's only response to it was their gentle aura, their presence that seemed to envelop me in something warm and loving, like a blanket of infinity. They seemed to be able to hear me when I spoke out loud, so that's how I ended up getting their attention. "Is anyone there?" I asked, and felt a response appear in front of my train of thought. It was a loving, "Hello there." Again, I shook off the surprise and continued to expand into this mindscape where the stranger was. Then, I slowly started to realise that it wasn't just one person, it was a whole group of people, and it felt like they were looking down upon me as I lay there. It almost gave me the vibe of a hospital, with a team of nurses simply doing their thing around me and taking care of me, and this aforementioned stranger started to make his role clear to me. Everyone in that space had such a genuine and caring energy surrounding them. It was almost like my mind had communicated exactly what I needed in the moment, which was something or someone to help ease the tension and great discomfort in my body. It was like a hospital of rebirth and healing. "Who are you, sir?" I asked out loud. A response came. "Think of me as your doctor. We'll take good care of you, don't worry." I turned my attention to the others in the room, the nurse-like ones who were going about their business around me in this mindscape. All of this was so confounding. Meanwhile, my waves of nausea refused to subside, occasionally sending some convulsions through my waking body. "What's happening to me, sir? Is this what death is like? Am I really dying already?" I asked. This person, who I'll refer to as the doctor, responded by making their loving and caring aura even stronger and more all-encompassing, totally shrouding my heart and mind with love. Dying? That's a complicated question. In one sense of the word, you'll live stronger than ever, but in the other sense, yes, you could say you are dying. It all felt so rapturous, the way all my senses seemed to mix into one another, with my stomach turning over and over. Something was surely slipping away from me, that being the entire world around me. Every atom from my waking life was falling into nothingness with me, and with the doctor. He gave off the feeling of a divine guide, someone who exists only to help me pass entirely into this other plane, someone who lives to expand love. I became much more sure of what was really happening here. I was indeed dying, you know, feeling my memories disappear and meld into one another, lying in my bed, transforming into the mindscape. I was dying and felt so good. It felt so incredibly good to let go of everything in the waking world, so euphoric to become this, whatever the hell I was actually becoming. Through all the ecstasy and bliss cascading into me, I managed to mutter quietly, "Hey doctor, I'm gonna be okay, right?" "Of course," the doctor responded. "You have us, and we're right here to help you through." He continued to project his aura into this space around us, and the more my ego and the world surrounding it slipped out of focus, the stronger this strangely powerful love became. I knew for sure I was in good hands, and this love continued to permeate my soul. It flowed and poured into me like nothing I've ever felt before. A pure and conscious effort to help me let go of the world that I experienced before this one. do you want me to hold your plushie while you go?" I lifted my weak arms off my bed to grab my Totoro plushie that I always put right beside my bed, and gave the doctor a hushed in response. "Just please take care of my body. Don't let it do anything weird while I'm not in it." In the most gentle and loving tone I've ever felt, he said, "Where we're going, you won't need that body." I then averted my gaze from him, noticing something entirely new. There were giant, blue, glowing ethereal beings holding bows pointed up at the sky, the expansive, beautiful, unending cosmos. Lined up at the feet of the giants were souls like mine, ready to cross between planes. The giants would take one of these souls, load them into the bow, and fire them off into the sky. They glistened so brightly as they flew, and every single one of them soared out into the deep. I realized that each one of them was morphing into a new form when they reached the place in the cosmos. Every soul transformed into a star, the very same stars that sing us to sleep at night, their symphony of voices just as radiantly beautiful as they are everlasting. I exhaustedly stuttered out a sentence using what little energy I had left in my body. "Doctor, take care of my body while I'm gone." In that moment, I felt my body in the waking world slip away entirely, and with it went all the nausea and unease and churning of my stomach. I was through. I made my transition entirely into this space with no inkling of concern about the body I left behind, incorporating myself into this sort of spirit body. It was the most liberating feeling in existence, so much that it was beyond existence, beyond anything my mouth or my keyboard could ever express in 1,000 pages. I was in line, then slowly approaching the feet of one of the giants. I waited in reverence, soaking in the sheer bliss of the mindscape and its everlasting love. There was no time, and all times existing at once. No way for my mind to measure or quantify the things around me, and there was no need to either. Trying to organize or define such a thing in your head would be ultimately pointless. I finally approached the foot of one of the giants, and outstretched my arm to rest my hand on him. It was beyond magical, simply to be touching it. I glanced at the doctor again, silently thanking him for bringing me here, and the giant's hand moved down next to me, ready to pick me up and notch me into his great bow. So I stepped into his hand, let him do his work. I've never felt more prepared for anything in my life. He loaded me up, and with a silent nod farewell, sent me soaring into the expanse. Part of me doesn't even know what to write next. I felt every single bit of information accumulate into one great entirety. It was like the eschaton of every idea and every feeling. No single border or division was in existence anymore. Division was just a faded remnant of my past life, which served to test every being in its measure of universal love. There was no need for division, no need for any resistance, no need to understand and quantify, no need to know how much time I had been here or whether I'd really been here all along. I felt there's no existence more genuine than this, which gave me the impression that it was the deepest level of love and consciousness one could ever find. I would continue to exist here for time immemorial, forever and evermore. When all of that slowly began to subside, I started to feel my body again. Ever so slowly, the idea of a surrounding world returned to my mind, while the feeling of divinity began to fade. What did not fade, though, was the oneness, the feeling that everything and everyone is one and the same. Every piece of the waking world was linked to every other, and they have been linked for all of existence. We are all stars. We are all part of the same universal performance. We are every instrument and every voice in it. We are the hands that play the instruments, and we are the vibrations that echo through space, culminating in the cosmic sonata of unity. It's a divine unity, which reaches beyond love and comprehension, When I opened my eyes, I almost gasped for air, as if I'd come up to the surface of the ocean after an eternity in the water, clawing at the sand of reality and dragging myself back onto the shore of the waking world. I still felt it all existing within me, the hum of the instruments of the universe. I was coming down from the awe-inspiring crescendo of the cosmic song and dance, gently waving and shimmering in bliss, because I was definitely still tripping. Almost immediately I opened Discord in excitement, ready to share this experience and feeling of oneness with the world. I talked about it online with some good friends, and all the while, listening to music, singing my heart out and dancing around my room, despite the persisting stomachache. To be honest, I couldn't care less about the pain, because I was just so busy reveling in the glory of being alive, the glory of the felt presence of immediate experience. I felt so conscious and in love with the world without the walls of my ego in the way of my truest emotions, and it was one of the happiest moments of my life. Just like my first trip, I can't thank you enough for reading this. I don't know what I'd do if I couldn't share this experience with someone out there, almost as if it beckons to be shared and spread, just like the endless love that permeates this world. There was so much to this trip that every part of it simply oozes meaning and profundity to me. Once you see yourself in everything, you'll never forget the feeling of discovering that. Infinite love will continue to run its courses through us, through all conscious beings, and it will never leave. The most powerful thing in the universe is right inside ourselves, hiding right under our noses. It hides in every tree, every river, every grain of sand and soil, every inkling of empty space and every star in the night sky. What are we without our guiding lights but a whisper in the crowd that simply watches the cosmic performance? Love yourself, everyone, because you mean so much more than you know. Mother Spirit Awaits, a DMT trip report by Universal Shaman, posted to earwud.org September 28, 2004. It's been a few weeks now since my first encounter with DMT, something long awaited and highly anticipated, but which completely transcended any expectations I had of it. I'd read a lot of McKenna's rants about self-transforming machine elves, the Amazon shamans helping spirits and ancestors, and friends had told me about gnomes in giant stat cats running around in a fully psychedelic playground. No matter how much I heard about the alien intelligence encounters, I kept putting them aside as interpretations that colour and play off of each other. Like one person says they encountered aliens, and so the next person interprets their own trip in a similar way, which creates a chain of influence over every next tripper. However, I did expect something alien, something that I could recognise as alien, something sci-fi or fantastical, like a psychedelic Star Trek. I couldn't have been further from the fact of the matter. I was at a friend's house organising some other drug-related circumstances. It came up that he had a bit of DMT left and asked me if I was interested in trying some. Absolutely not. So we got in the car and drove to a place he recommended tripping at. Up in the hills, in a national park, which was a 5-minute walk through scrub into a secluded forest area. During the walk we talked about the feeling of the place, noting that there was a distinct pagan ritual site feel about the area, a kind of overarching, all-seeing watchful presence about the environment. It was peaceful, clear-skied, and fairly shady and cool. In retrospect, I'm sure this comfortable place influenced the quality of the DMT flash. I had 2 attempts about 15 minutes apart, because the first was noticeably not a peak experience, but was a good introduction to the totally alien nature of the DMT visions. Taking in the first toke, around 25 milligrams, I began to notice weird body sensations. My trunk became slightly elongated, and everything was surging with an energy that was totally silent to the ears, like a raging river in my mind. My heart felt like it was about to burst through my ribcage as I reached the peak of the inhalation. I let out a single laugh as I began to exhale, partly because the sensations were awesome, not unlike the body rushes of mushrooms, but it was mostly just ecstatic that DMT molecules were finally having their way with my mind. I closed my eyes and was immediately face to face with a supreme being of sorts. It had no face, and its form was like a string of multicolored lights constantly morphing, like a clown making a series of balloon animals, beginning with a dog, which he then alters a couple of parts of, holds it differently to reveal a dolphin, and so on and so forth. It was certainly a living presence, and without a face, it was still somehow staring eye to eye with me as though it knew everything about my entire life. There was no sense of emotional attachment, but there was definitely a supralinguistic communication happening. This being and I were travelling at great speed through an infinite stretch of deep space. I was chasing it. It stayed the same distance away from me the whole time and seemed to be at ease with the speed, while I was struggling to keep up. It was as though it wanted me there, but not yet. Not in this way. It was telling me to come back when I could keep up with it, when I could catch up and pass straight through. Maybe this was the membrane that separates the being's world of mine, the chrysanthemum that McKenna described. The being zoomed away and the effects started to fade, leaving me in a blissful kind of luminescent state that surpassed any notion of Zen state or meditative bliss. The real world had become indescribably fresh and crystal clear, all while I had my eyes closed. And 15 minutes later, the second attempt was around twice the dose of the first, which began just the same, the visual environment becoming kind of fuzzy and my body seemed to be spaghettifying just slightly. But within seconds of this, there was a distinct difference. I'd only heard this described in other people's accounts once, I think, and I'd totally forgotten about the possibility of it happening until it actually happened to me. So just after I released the toke, I looked around to see what was happening to my senses as I was coming up, when the entire universe began to buzz. It was like a deep bass feedback loop that you sometimes hear in electronic music, like the humming noise of flying saucers in movies that's very electronic and computer-like. But it was unbelievably real and right there, all around me. I immediately thought that the DMT had unlocked a whole new realm of sound that we don't normally hear. A background kind of sound that would distract our ears from normal functioning, the sound that matter makes. I've perceived the vibrations of matter and subatomic particles on other trips such as mushrooms and acid, and once or twice even on the old hooch. But now with DMT, it was a totally audible reality. And more than just audible, this sharp bassy hum that was coming out of everything made everything vibrate, including myself and my sitter next to me. It was so intense and pervasive that I had to close my eyes to escape the motion sickness of this vibrating mass of existence. When I did, the buzz began to mutate and break up into all these telephonic, electronic modem-like noises, like a kaleidoscope of sound. The sounds built and built, reaching a peak that culminated in a vortex, which sucked everything in existence, the buzzing, the environment around me, and my entire being into a totally foreign dimension. And there I was, with total silence. The buzzing was gone, and I was in a room looking at a wall. The wall was like a complete scaffold of constantly morphing angular prisms, shimmering with colours that are completely beyond the descriptions of any language, and totally awe-inspiring. I felt an uncontrollable smile grow across my face. Reality check. But I kept watching. I immediately noticed that there was something more than just a wall. I noticed at first there was something in the wall popping out occasionally to show me it was there. It wanted me to recognise it before it would fully come out though. It was something like watching the flat surface of a calm beach and seeing a dolphin periodically break the surface for air. When I recognised that there was definitely something living, swimming through this scaffold of unbelievable shapes and colours, it finally came out. It was a non-human female being, flying around this hyperdimensional room of sorts. She wore a flowing cape or gown that streamed directly off a big round glowing face, the kind of face that a 3-year-old kid draws. A circle with dots for eyes and a curved line for a mouth. And that's really all there was of her. But her face was so alive, so compassionate, and so enlightened. She was very happy when I realised she was there as well. Then, I watched as a pedestal literally grew out of the floor of this room, made of the same unearthly super brilliant scaffolding. My attention must have been distracted by this thing growing out of the ground, because the female being got in my face and communicated to me, not in words I might add. "Look at what's on the pedestal." I looked up and saw a diamond-shaped object that was made of similar stuff to the walls, but infinitely more brilliant, more dazzling, more unspeakably awesome. And as my smile grew, total awe and amazement filled me, and this female being began flying around the object at great speed, keeping her eyes fixed on me the whole time. She was doing flips and sharp turns and cheering as though she was celebrating the fact that she had the chance to show me whatever this was. She kept communicating to me. Look at it, isn't this awesome?" This continued, and I kept my eyes on that unbelievable object as the scene began to fade. I started to become aware of my hands folded in my lap. They were slightly sweaty, and my body was on an up and full of energy, just as my mind began to return to the reality of sitting in a forest setting, next to the person who had just initiated me into yet another, but easily the most awesome, dimension of conscious reality. I was left feeling unusually happy for at least a week after that experience. It has also left me with a profound sense of fulfillment, and far greater purpose and perspective in my life's quest to understand the nature of this human existence. From these experiences, I have to say that DMT is quite patently the most accessible of the deep psychedelic states, and in terms of the practical, empirical analysis of one's own shamanic journeys, this is by far the easiest landscape to traverse that I've encountered. Mushrooms require a huge amount of dedication and spiritual preparation, weeks and months for the most rewarding outcomes. They also require massive amounts of attention, a great deal of energy to keep myself at least partly detached from the emotional roller coasters that the mushroom state can draw me into. And this is particularly because of the extended time of the trips. The same goes for powerful acid experiences and other indole hallucinogens. I say this not because DMT is so short-acting, but because on a proper dose of DMT, one's being is thrust into a peak experience. There really is no choice in the matter. On mushrooms or acid, one must guide his or her own thoughts and emotions through precarious unknown landscapes, and even then a peak experience is not guaranteed. DMT, however, seems to serve a peak experience on a platter with a salad on the side. I knew from the moment I started toking to when I found myself in another dimensional room. I knew this was right. The DMT wanted me there, and it took me there. All I had to do was receive it graciously. Blue by You, a DMT trip report by Blue Boy, posted to earbud.org, March 21st, 2004. So several years ago, I experimented with DMT. I was introduced to this chemical through a friend of mine who is heavily into shamanism. Over a 12-month period, I smoked it 4 times with ever-increasing doses. My friend recommended that I work my way up to the spirit dose. Now, this was wise because even in smaller doses, it can be a frightening experience. But on my 5th journey, I finally found them. Or more accurately, they found me. I've since read accounts from McKenna and Strassman's subjects. I guess my experience was similar, though I didn't perceive myself as being inside a structure. Rather, it seemed that the spirits were all around me. Wherever I looked, the swirling patterns transmogrified into these oscillating things which clearly acted independently of my own thoughts. At least that was the overwhelming perception I had. I can't really describe them. They were infinite in their complexity. I can see why people are convinced that they are entities separate from their own minds. It's inconceivable that anyone can imagine such. I don't know what you'd actually call them or it. Anyway, I was there, wherever the hell that was, and all of a sudden each one of my fingers was connected to a spirit. So here's where it gets really strange. There were thousands of them near me now, and millions in the distance, though if I looked at the distant ones, they then zoomed up close. So the next thing I know, each hand has thousands of fingers on them. I had complete control over each one as well. A bit like how I can move our left index finger, I could completely control left finger 40,624. It was like I was a conductor of sorts. They were dancing and flying around in accordance with what I did with my super hands. Sound and sight would merge and shift. I was quite literally conducting an orchestra of millions. There was a lot of other stuff too, but I've never been able to recall it. My final memories being in absolute nothingness except for one spirit. As I looked at it, it started to oscillate, so I was looking at myself, or what I perceived was myself. I was changing form 1,000 times a second. The oscillations became faster and the spirit wanted to know who it was. Now, this wasn't asked in words, but I knew what the question was, somehow. "Well, I don't know," I said. This conversation went back and forth at an ever greater speed, until at the same time we were both saying, "He is you, he is you," and then the words would converge into just hue. Literally, it was blue. I mean, I became the colour blue itself. It was a psychedelic play on words. I was a frequency. And then this spirit rushed up to the room from me from the other side of the galaxy, laughing. He had a present, like a normal box with a blue ribbon, and he said, "What's your favourite hue?" So next thing I knew, I'd opened my eyes. The extra freaky element was that I had turned my head around and was looking straight out the window at, well, you guessed it, a big clear blue sky. Now, once I'd met them, or myself, perhaps, well, I certainly don't ascribe to the literal idea that DMT is conducive to contacting aliens. Well, after all this, I decided not to do DMT again. I've experienced total and absolute fucking out there, and I'd be scared that if I did it again, I wouldn't quite make it back entirely. I don't think that there could be a more intense experience imaginable. However, I never imagined I'd experience what I did either. It is amazing, but a word of caution. This isn't a fun party drug at all. Some people want to go skydiving, and that's cool, but this was like being a Super Bowl bouncing around the universe itself. At the time of going through all this, it really was too much. And the final freakiness? At certain times of the morning or afternoon, I'd look up at the sky and get this deja vu feeling. It's just the right shade of blue. Observed and Observer melded together. A DMT trip report by Megan, posted to earbud.org June 14th, 2021. So after 20 years of desperately wanting to try the mysterious and elusive DMT, I finally figured out how to obtain some. The package arrived and I fished out a small baggie of light yellow powder. Interestingly, I was expecting it to be white. I immediately tested it. All good, thankfully. So I weighed it out and put all but my 50mg dose into a glass jar, since I heard that plastic could degrade the substance if left in too long. I lacked the correct smoking setup, so I resorted to the sandwich method of layering the powder between ashes in my regular glass weed bowl. I was satisfied that everything was ready and rushed to my bedroom in excitement. This was it. The day had finally arrived. Was I going to meet the famous machine elves? Was I going to astrally fly to outer space? Or was I going to learn the secrets of the universe? Well, either way, I couldn't wait to find out. It was early evening and dark outside. I turned on low ambient lighting, switched off my phone and laid on my bed. The room was entirely silent. I was full of anticipation and a bit of trepidation. I flicked the lighter and took care to only lightly touch the top layer of ash as to vaporize the powder. I took a deep drag and automatically tried to stem the rising smoke from the bowl before I was ready to take the second hit. The effects hit me like a freight train within 2 to 3 seconds in a most unexpected manner. My surroundings exploded into a bright fractal that reminded me of colourful Hindu-type designs. I also felt this light body load sweep over me that seemed to originate from the upper chest. Shocked, I hurried to take the second hit, worried that I would become too impaired to operate the pipe if I waited a moment longer. I never did quite make it to the intended third hit. My consciousness had left the building completely by that point. But I did enter what I can only describe as a waking dreamlike state. I didn't feel the sensation leaving my body. I just seamlessly blipped into another reality entirely. There was nothing notable or distinctive about this place though. My previous reality was instantly forgotten, although I retained a measure of ability to form distinctive thoughts. Was this some sort of waiting area or holding room? In contrast to the brightly pulsating fractals from moments earlier, I now only saw a whitish grey fog everywhere. I was also keenly aware of a benevolent or perhaps neutral entity leaning over me, looking down on me, calmly inspecting me. I couldn't quite make out any distinct features, and the entity did not speak to me really. But I felt completely calm, patient, and a bit curious as to what it was doing. I understood only after the trip was done that this was the gatekeeper who would direct my journey, because I soon blipped again and everything changed drastically a second time. So then the ability to form thoughts dissolved away. I was no longer me, and it didn't matter because I'd forgotten about me. Well, forgot is a poor description, because that indicates mental faculties to begin with, and I had none. I was no longer a person, and had no concept or care of what a person even was. I also had no human emotions, and no human thoughts. All that really existed was a deep sense of peace and contentment. It was the ultimate, ideal state of being. In other words, the awareness that was once me was individually conscious, but very much not an individual. Now, this was clearly ego death, and probably something even far beyond that. People sometimes describe ego death as terrifying, but how can you be terrified if you're no longer a being that experiences human emotions? So you know what, I'm not quite sure what this was at all, aside from a complete 100% transformation. The transition from a complicated and chaotic human individual to a simple electrical charge was smooth and seamless. I peacefully existed as an energetic building block of whatever plane of existence I was transported to, and it was perfect. Time didn't exist here, and my awareness had always been there and always would be. My very essence undulated and flowed this way and that, weightless, and riding invisible waves over vast, vast distances. I just quietly dwelt, devoid of thought, and in a state of bliss, for all of eternity. There were no entities here, just as I was not an entity. It was nothing but a perfect, fluidly shifting and endless sea of harmoniously vibrating energy. So as the DMT began to wear off, I gradually became aware of my human body. What? I gasped, and my hand flew up and touched my face. Oh no. This was my first thought. I was thinking again, and it was weird and jarring. It was something like being woken from a peaceful sleep by someone rudely dumping a bucket of ice water on your bed, but 1,000 times worse. Then, sobering up very swiftly, I remembered everything. My human life on Earth. I was Megan. I remembered her now. I'd taken drugs? No, this was such a cruel development. This wasn't fair at all. My real life was back there, in the blissful sea. To say that being suddenly burdened with human consciousness again was a disappointment would be the understatement of the millennia. It may sound like I'm a normally depressed person, or that I hate myself or something, the way I describe my great sadness and sense of loss at returning to my human self. But honestly, that isn't the case. It's key to the story to include that. In all honesty, my life isn't any more horrible than the average person's. In retrospect, I find it quite curious that transitioning into a bolt of electricity was seamless and unnoticeable, but transitioning back to what's supposed to be my normal self felt unnatural, to the point of minor impending doom. It was also hard to wrap my head around the fact that I'd only been out for 10 minutes, as opposed to the feeling of timelessness I experienced in the sea of harmony. I truly cannot wait to go back, but I know instinctively that it's not something that should be done casually or for mere escapism. I respect it far too much for that. I have no doubt that I was in a real place that exists somewhere out there. but I'm not sure if DMT is for everyone. What I mean by this is if you're looking to party and get lit, this is really not the right substance for that. And I could see it going sideways pretty badly if someone went into it with that mindset, as the gatekeeper may not take it very kindly. Know what you're afraid of. A 10-gram solo mushroom trip report by Tommy's Planet, posted to the Psychonauts subreddit 6 years ago. A quick disclaimer here. I know how dumb I was during this trip report, but know that this took place quite a while ago. My experiences with these substances have changed me in many ways, and I have nothing but respect for them now. I honestly can't decide how I feel about this trip. Part of me thinks it was a horrible mistake, and another part appreciates the information I gained from it. First of all, I broke many of the tripping rules, which already makes me an idiot. At this point in time, I'd tripped 20 times with friends, and this was the third time doing it alone. I had positive experiences with those. Originally, I was going to dose 5 grams of dried shrooms. However, on the day, I decided that I was going to double the dose. This was due to me wanting to go deeper. I had previously tried 7 grams, and that was a glorious experience. I was going to start with 7 grams, and by hour 2, I'd dosed the other 3G. Due to past experience, I arrogantly believed that I could handle it all. I'd planned the entire trip out, music playlist, decked out my room to trip in, and wrote down all my goals for the trip. I even had glow sticks. It was 10:30 PM when I decided to dose, and during the onset and come up, I hung out with my guinea pig and prepared some food for the peak. I ended up going with watermelons. After 15 to 20 minutes, I was seeing layers of geometric patterns all over my room. Multiple layers all on top of each other. I was enamoured by their sheer beauty. I then proceeded to listen to some music and close my eyes. The closed-eye visuals were out of this world. The next few parts I completely blanked out. I remember looking at the clock and seeing that it was 12 AM. I was shocked by this because I didn't realise how much time had already passed. Even more unusual was the fact that I didn't feel how long that amount of time felt at all. It didn't feel like time had passed quickly or slowly. Time didn't mean much of anything. I know this doesn't make much sense, but even months after the experience, I'm finding it quite hard to articulate. So I then ate the rest of the mushrooms and smoked a bowl of weed. After a while, I continued to listen to music and try to have a good time. This is where the trip took a horrific turn. I started thinking about my future. I started to delve into the negative, thinking of myself as a failure and that I wasn't good enough at all. In my mind, I was envisioning a future where I was a homeless failure, all alone with no one in the world. In my mind, I saw no other way where my life could lead me, and it genuinely horrified me. The visuals at this point covered my entire field of vision. I could no longer tell the closed-eye visuals from the opened-eye ones. They all just blended together, and I couldn't possibly begin to describe what they looked like now. I was getting really bad vibes, and the only thing I thought to do was to lie on the floor, curled up in the fetal position, which to be honest is probably the worst thing I could have done. Over the next couple of hours, all I remember was me repeating the words, "I'm doomed. It's over. It's over." Felt the most scared I've felt in my entire life. It was truly terrifying. I believe this continued on for a couple hours, although I don't remember. I blanked out fully at this point. So after some more time passed, I started to forget why I thought I was a failure. After that, all my memories had dissolved. I had zero access to any of them. I couldn't remember who I was, and all I knew was I was a failure and that I wasn't good enough for anybody. This made me feel absolutely horrible. After a while of this, I started to become lucid. voice in my head appeared and told me to get up. So, of course, I obeyed it. It was a struggle though, as all my joints felt winded up and I had this massive body load going on which obviously hindered my movement. However, this had gotten me out of my nightmare, and I remembered that a way to get out of a negative headspace would be to change the location. So there I went, and wandered into the room next to mine where I kept my guinea pig. Seeing things that were familiar to me grounded me entirely. I was finally starting to remember. It was 3:30 AM now. I started to relax and actually started to turn the experience around. But funnily enough, as soon as I started to relax, I projectile vomited. Luckily I made it to my bin, so there was no mess. I remember the sick kept coming and coming. Sorry, I know that's gross. A short time passed and I began to think that maybe I'd actually tricked myself into thinking I was throwing up, although the smell shot down that fury soon after. The clock read 4 AM and I came to the conclusion that I needed some sleep. The body high I got was quite pleasant. I then played with some glow sticks and the traces were awesome and watched the visuals fade away. This trip really taught me a lot of things about myself. It showed me what I was afraid of and more. It wasn't instantly beneficial, but I'm still integrating the information months after the experience. It really helped me get to the root of a lot of my problems, ranging from insecurities, low self-esteem, and a lack of self-confidence. The fact that I eventually got myself out of it and managed to pull it together actually gave me a strange sense of empowerment, though it did take me long enough. Before this trip, I've had difficult and bad experiences, but nothing can compare to this one. This and a previous trip woke me the fuck up. These compounds demand respect, and I can guarantee that I learnt my lesson. Heroic doses require a trip sitter. This trip showed me what I was afraid of. Not in the sense of being scared of spiders or anything, but the true demons that we all have. So I continue to trip around once a month, and I'm planning many more experiences for the future. I hope you guys enjoyed reading my nightmare trip.